The Philadelphia Convention and the Constitution. So this is one of those areas of American history that people are somewhat familiar with, but the way it is depicted is if this event did not happen, America, the states, or even the Union, the United States, would not have continued. And certainly, if the Constitution had not originated, the Union of the states, as we know it today, may not have come into existence the same way. It's impossible to speculate about those things. But the idea that this event took place and its success or failure would lead to the subsequent survival or destruction of America is likely untrue. But the Philadelphia Convention is known better as the Constitutional Convention, although at the time it was just the Philadelphia Convention. And importantly so, if they sold it as a constitutional convention, we are writing a new constitution, that would not have been deemed acceptable by even many of the participants and the states and legislatures of the states, all sorts of things. Now, the American Constitution of the United States, the longest lasting written constitution in history so far. It has lasted over 200 years once being accepted by the states. And there's much to appreciate in it for its imperfections. And there's some things that we can question with it too that bring about, did it accomplish what was expected? And there are some things to criticize within the Constitution. Some view this event at the Philadelphia Convention as miraculous. Some believe that it was a unique, supernatural almost moment where there was some sort of divine intervention in this point of history. And while it's not to discount that, there's also some things to wonder about here and criticize and see the story of how the Constitution unfolded. The Philadelphia Convention was originally a meeting to amend the Articles. And so look at here some of the problems. I put problems in quotes because problems are relative sometimes to who they're affecting. These are not problems that the American people are very concerned about, in the sense that they believe there is a demand for a stronger national government. They're not problems that would necessarily be solved with more power to a political entity. They're problems if you were maybe participating in the government of the Articles, the Congress of the Articles, and your designs are being frustrated, or you feel embarrassed in comparison to the other nations of the world, or you show up in other countries and you don't have money to be an ambassador for the United States, or you feel like you could accomplish and organize things efficiently on behalf of the states, but the limitations of the ways to change the Articles make this impossible, make this hugely difficult. So here are a few problems. One is that the states were slow about paying off their debts. States are slow about paying off their debts. Well, what debt? Well, they're paying debts for the Revolutionary War, paying off the Revolutionary War debts. Now, Virginia had paid off quite a bit. It was almost done by time of the early Republic under the Constitution. Other states were not as far along. And for some very specific reasons, they didn't have enough silver and gold. They didn't have enough money. They didn't have enough things in the state. And remember, there's no taxation from the Congress of the Articles. They may ask for money, but the states may refuse to pay it. It's voluntary. It was a requisition. Now, many states did pay, and that's important to look at. Well, why? If it was voluntary, why would they pay? Shouldn't we expect that the norm would be that they wouldn't pay, and it'd be unexpected that they did? Now, why are the states slow about paying their debts? Many reasons. However, if you think about the system of the Articles request of the government of the United States at the time, very weak, requesting money from the states, and then the states taxing their own people and sending the money to the Congress, and the Congress allocates the money toward the debts. That's not an efficient process. So a lot of the states were paying off the debts on their own by their own taxes and different things that they were participating in. And when I say taxes, they weren't usually directly taxing the people. It was more of a sales tax type of thing, tariffs and things of that nature that would show up maybe in the prices of goods. There wasn't like income tax, things of that nature. But you could imagine, let me put it like this. Let's say there are two people, one person over here, one person over here. This person has $500 worth of debt. This person over here has $100 worth of debt. Let's say that we consolidate their debts. We take their debts here, this government, this entity, in this case could be the government, consolidates both debts and takes over responsibility. Now, this government wants to request, or it even wants to tax, but the Articles government couldn't do that, tax in order to get those things. So, because it doesn't have any money on its own, so it has to do some sort of taxation. But now it's going to tax both these people, and the full amount is $600. So it's going to tax this person $300 and this person $300. Well, this person who owed $500 got a deal. This person who owed $100 is having to pay more. So why would you want to consolidate? In this case, yeah, it may give you a deal. So a lot of states had no interest in doing that. And the consolidation of state debts, that will be one of the big things happening or discussed during the time of the new federal republic under the Constitution. One of the big ideas of Alexander Hamilton and others will be, like Jefferson, will be opposed to that because it will be seen as that will be a surrender of power. And so that the total amount of voluntary state contributions supposedly owed to the Confederation by the states of 1788 exceeded the amount of gold and silver in the entire United States. So when there's more debt than money to pay the debt, you could see why there would be a problem. States actually contributed more to the war effort than would have been expected. And that book, The Collective Action Under the Articles of Confederation by Kevin Doherty, asks that question as an economic historian and says, well, why did states give it all if it was totally voluntary? But this could be very frustrating if you are part of the government of the Articles and you're requesting money and the states have the prerogative to say no. Well, that can be frustrating in any situation where you're trying to collect money from people, but they have a voluntary right not to pay, a legal right not to participate, not to pay. McDonald's wants to collect money from me all the time. And sometimes I give it to them and sometimes I don't, right? But the idea here is that the government of the Articles has provided services on behalf of the states. The states should pay up, but the amount requested does not necessarily, it can, but does not necessarily match the services rendered. Meaning, just because you ask for an amount of money does not mean that that is the amount appropriate to pay for the services that have been given, especially if you as a state can pay for something yourself. So the central government is underfunded. But what is the right amount of funds for a central government? Right? There's no real central government at this time because it doesn't have taxing power, and it doesn't have a coercive monopoly over the states. It can't make them do things by law without their consent. So if you're in the government, it's underfunded. But if you are the average American person, whatever struggles may be happening for you, and there were many, one of the things that is not your concern is, oh my gosh, the Articles government, the Congress feels like it doesn't have enough money. That's just not on your radar, or it doesn't have enough control over the states, or that dispersion of power limited government. It limited the powers of government. Now, that doesn't mean the states weren't states, that they couldn't do things that were not good, make laws, make taxes, have unfair practices like slavery or things of that nature. All that notwithstanding, the states were a smaller scope of power. And so they couldn't extend that power as far as the central government could. Therefore, the power was more severely limited. It was said by Robert Morris at the time. The Congress, under the Articles, the Congress had the privilege of asking for everything, but the states were given the prerogative of granting nothing. Congress could do a requisition, request for money to the states, and the states could say no. Now, that's a hugely important power and a huge limit on a government. If entities may deny taxation, it takes the teeth out of government. Now, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton will say, we need sanction, we need coercion, you can make a suggestion, you can request all you want, but if you can't back it up by force, then there is no such thing as a law. And that's somewhat true. But the states viewed themselves as the lawmaking entities and their legislatures, not the Congress of the Articles. They did not want one central government being the lawmaking authority for them. They wanted more localized self-government. And so what Madison, Hamilton, others see as a weakness in the Articles of Confederation, others see as a limit on the potential use and abuse of power. Because if you cut off the money and the ability to use force to get the money, then power is much less likely to be abused. Because the nature of a modern political state is not only that it can tax, but that it can back up taxation with force. And that could be a debate about what the nature of those things are, but that's central to the identity of a modern nation state. Now, what Madison and Hamilton are maybe failing to realize is that the government of the Confederation is a confederacy. It's an alliance. It's a team. It is not supposed to be a central lawmaking authority where elites establish the good ideas that become laws for all the states. The states are supposed to know their own situation and, right or wrong, respond to it. Now let's talk about the convention that nobody's ever heard of, the Annapolis Convention. And the reason I bring this up is because no one has ever heard of it. The Annapolis Convention happened September 11th through September 14th. It's just actually today, 2020, is September 14th. The Annapolis Convention in 1786, we've never heard of. Now, here is the mystery we have to solve historically. Why have we never heard of the Annapolis Convention? And why is the Annapolis Convention, which was a convention to amend the Articles, just like the Philadelphia Convention, why have we never heard of this, and why was this one unsuccessful when almost exactly a year later, the Philadelphia Convention did something much bolder? They didn't just amend the Articles, they abandoned the Articles and created a new constitution, which then would be offered to the states for acceptance or rejection. Why did no one really show up or show interest in the Annapolis Convention that was convened by Alexander Hamilton? Yet a year later, Constitution Day is September 17th, 1787. A year later, the delegations from the states will show up to the Philadelphia Convention. And after struggling through and debating for the summer, a new constitution will be written. When a year before they didn't even really want to show up and amend the Articles? Well, a couple different reasons. The Annapolis Convention, for one, is missing one key individual, and that is George Washington. Washington sees Shays' Rebellion take place, is told about it, is concerned and frightened, and then believes that there is a need for a stronger central government that may intervene in the states when there is a rebellion. So Washington shows up, and like a magnet, this draws men to the convention, feeling that it is much more serious if George Washington has come out of retirement. Although the convention is still understood, the Philadelphia Convention is still understood as discussing and debating ideas about amending the Articles of Confederation, for which, according to the rules, according to Article 13, requires the unanimous agreement of all 13 states, which means at the very least, to have that discussion, all 13 states represented have to be present. Then the changes would go back to the states, and they would discuss whether or not their governments, their state governments, would discuss whether or not they would adopt them, whether or not they would accept the changes. And if they didn't unanimously consent legally, changes could not go forward. So the Annapolis Convention is kind of a mystery. Why have we never heard of it? Because it didn't matter. It didn't happen. Nothing of historical significance happened there except the contrast with a year later. Constitutional Convention, or the Philadelphia Convention more appropriately, taking place from May 1787 to September 17th, 1787, which is Constitution Day. And this is certainly a unique event in history. These 55 men meet in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for the summer months of 1787. But take note, and this is an artist's depiction, but take note of what they're wearing. And then think about the fact that this is in the hottest months of the year with heat plus humidity, with 55 men in one room, no air conditioning, no deodorant. And we know the potential of irritability when there's the factor of heat added and uncomfortability. And the style of the time was powdered wigs for many people. So there's those physical conditions, plus they barred the windows, locked the doors. This was a secret meeting, which adds another element we should talk about in a second. But these 55 men, geniuses, in many cases, significant historical individuals, not perfect by any means, but hugely important people. George Washington doesn't really make any speeches. He presides over the conference. James Madison, the architect. Alexander Hamilton, who will be there and will leave at one point. Ben Franklin. Other significant individuals. Some very important missing people as well. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson are not present. They are both out of the country, and I believe at this time both in France. But so we have a problem. 12 delegates sent states. Congress. 12 states sent delegates, rather, excuse me. Meaning there were only representatives there from 12 states. According to Article 13, you need 13 to agree. Little Rhode Island refused to send a delegation, which means they chose non-participation. And they resist a long time ratification, the acceptance of the Constitution. But we're actually very heavily pressured into accepting the Constitution. Can the Constitutional Convention legally proceed? Can it go forward? Did they break the rules? Well, they are going to discuss the articles. However, at some point they are going to say we will instead start from the ground up, writing a new constitution. James Madison will say, by the way, I have this Virginia plan, which I think would be good, and they debate those things and change it and eventually produce the Constitution. But the point is, this is a constitution to amend the articles, and these 55 men come out with a document giving the government significantly more powers. Now, it's not legally binding at this point, offering it to the states and saying, we the people, that they presume to speak in the name of the people. And that's often what elites in power do, is they say whatever they're doing is in the name of the people. Therefore, if anybody questions it, you're questioning the will of the people. Now, can they proceed? Is this event legal? They will continue to have secret meetings for 4 months, and no one will know except the men who were there what was said in those meetings for about 40 years. at that point later, James Madison will eventually produce his notes that he was taking of who said what. But think about the fact that nobody knew what happened in this room for 40 years. And James Madison said that he didn't want those writings about the convention, the notes that were taken, the points that were written down about the speeches that the men made. He said he didn't want them produced and published until after all the participants who were there were dead. Some ask, was this event a coup? Meaning a gathering of some to overthrow the present governmental system. Now, there's no violence taking place here. It's just discussing a document that the states have the right to accept or reject. However, did it follow the rules in order to make a change? Or was following the rules even necessary because they weren't making a change to the original document, they were producing a new document? These 55 men met here in Independence Hall, eventually produced the Constitution. Not everybody signed. And then the states had to decide whether or not they would accept or reject. And the doors were closed. Men met in secret for 4 months. This is what brought about the Constitution, the longest lasting written constitution in history at this point. It is still officially the Constitution of the United States today. Now, the question I would leave us with at this point is, was this event legal? In other words, did it have the authority to do what it did? Not are you glad for it? Not, you could think, what would you do? But just in this sense, were the rules followed or were they broken? Was this event legal that birthed the Constitution?